Whispers echoed through London's gilded ballrooms about the Duke of Westmoreland. They called him a monster, a scarred phantom who allegedly drove his first bride to an early grave. High society shrank from his shadowed gaze. Yet one destitute aristocrat dared to step into his darkness, risking everything for survival. London, 1816. The season was in full, suffocating bloom, yet the only name on the lips of the ton was one spoken in hushed, terrified tones: Alistair Covington, the Duke of Westmoreland. Before the Battle of Waterloo, Alistair had been the golden boy of the Prince Regent's decadent court. He was renowned for his sharp wit, his immense fortune, and a face that had broken half the hearts in Mayfair. But the man who returned from the blood-soaked fields of Belgium was not the man who had left. A French cavalry sabre had torn across his visage, leaving a jagged silvered scar that slashed from his left temple down to his jawline. It blinded him in one eye, leaving it a milky, ghost-like blue, while his right eye burned with a volatile, unapproachable fury. Yet it was not the physical disfigurement that made society recoil. It was the darkness that had consumed him. Shortly after his return, his betrothed, Lady Rosalind, was found dead at the bottom of the grand staircase in his sprawling estate, Covington House. The coroner ruled it a tragic fall, but the gossips of London, fueled by Alistair's newfound, terrifying isolation, painted a different picture. They whispered that in a fit of war-induced madness, the Duke had thrown her. Since that day, Alistair had become a recluse. The grand doors of Covington House remained bolted, its windows shrouded in heavy velvet. He was the monster of Mayfair, a cautionary tale used by mothers to frighten their disobedient debutante daughters. Enter Genevieve Fairfax. At 22, Genevieve was officially on the shelf, an aging spinster by society's brutal standards. But securing a husband was the least of her concerns. Her father, Lord Richard Fairfax, a man whose love for the faro tables far outweighed his love for his family, had driven them to the absolute brink of ruin. He had amassed a staggering debt of £20,000 to Thomas Rutherford, a ruthless, newly wealthy industrialist who bought up aristocratic debts to force his way into high society. Rutherford had given Lord Fairfax an ultimatum: pay the debt in full by the end of the month, or hand over Genevieve to be his wife. To marry Rutherford was a death sentence. The man was notorious for his cruelty, his previous wives having quietly perished from mysterious consumptions. Genevieve had precisely 3 weeks to find a miracle. She possessed no dowry, no powerful connections, and only a sharp mind and an unyielding spirit to her name. She knew that begging the polite gentleman of the ton for salvation would yield nothing but pity and closed doors. She did not need a polite gentleman. She needed a monster. The opportunity presented itself at the Duchess of Devonshire's masquerade ball. It was a notoriously extravagant affair, the kind of event where the strict rules of propriety were temporarily suspended beneath silk domino masks and copious amounts of champagne. Genevieve attended wearing a borrowed, slightly frayed crimson gown, her face obscured by a simple black lace half-mask. She had heard the rumor from a loose-lipped footman. The Duke of Westmoreland was expected to attend. It was his first public appearance in over a year. The Prince Regent himself had demanded Alistair's presence, threatening to have the Crown intervene in the management of his unentailed estates if he did not prove himself of sound mind. Midnight struck, and the grand doors to the ballroom swung open. The orchestra faltered, the music dying an agonizing death, as Alistair Covington stepped over the threshold. He wore no mask. He didn't need to. His scarred face, illuminated by the harsh glare of 1,000 crystal chandeliers, was terrifying enough. He was clad entirely in midnight blue velvet and black leather, his imposing frame dominating the room. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, heavy with morbid fascination and palpable dread. As he walked toward the card room, the crowd parted for him like the Red Sea, ladies snapping their fans shut and gentlemen averting their eyes. Genevieve did not look away. She stood by a towering marble pillar, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. As Alistair passed, his good eye-piercing storm-glass gaze swept over the terrified crowd with deep, bitter contempt. For a fraction of a second his gaze locked onto Genevieve. He expected her to flinch. He expected her to drop her head in submission or turn away in disgust. Instead, Genevieve lifted her chin, meeting his stare with a steady, unblinking intensity. Alistair paused, a subtle shift in his rigid posture. A dark brow arched over his ruined eye. Then, with a dismissive sneer, he broke the contact and disappeared into the shadows of the card room. Genevieve took a deep breath, the scent of expensive beeswax candles and wilting roses filling her lungs. She gathered the skirts of her frayed crimson gown. It was time to make a deal with the devil. The card room was deserted, save for the solitary figure pouring himself a generous measure of brandy at the mahogany sideboard. The rest of the guests had purposefully evacuated the space the moment Alistair entered, preferring the suffocating heat of the ballroom to the suffocating presence of the Duke. "You are trespassing, little bird," Alistair's voice rasped. It was a low, gravelly sound, rough like crushed glass, ruined by the smoke of cannons and the screams of the battlefield. He didn't even turn around, though the clinking of the crystal decanter paused. Genevieve stepped fully into the room, letting the heavy oak door click shut behind her. "I was unaware the Duke of Westmoreland had claimed this room as a sovereign nation." "Tarks." Alistair turned, the brandy snifter halfway to his lips. The shadows of the room clung to the scarred side of his face, making him look truly demonic. He took a slow, deliberate sip, his eye raking over her threadbare gown and the proud tilt of her chin. "Take off the mask," he commanded softly. Genevieve reached up and pulled the black lace free, letting it drop to the floor. She did not lower her gaze. Genevieve Fairfax, Alistair mused, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Lord Richard's unfortunate daughter. I hear your father has finally gambled away the very roof over your head to that swine, Rutherford. Have you come to beg for coins, Lady Genevieve? Because I assure you, my charity died in the mud of Waterloo." But I have not come for charity, Your Grace," Genevieve said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I have come to offer you a proposition." Alistair barked a harsh, humorless laugh. "A proposition from a destitute spinster to a madman. This should be wildly entertaining. Tell me, what could you possibly possess that I could want?" "A shield," she answered simply. The smirk vanished from Alistair's face. He set the brandy down with a sharp clack. "Explain." Genevieve took a step closer, entering his personal space, an act that clearly startled him. "The Prince Regent threatens to strip you of your unentailed lands. The gossips claim you are utterly insane, prone to violent fits and incapable of managing your affairs. You are here tonight because you are desperate to prove them wrong, but glaring at the Tun like a cornered wolf will not convince the Crown of your sanity." "And you will?" he sneered, leaning down so his face was inches from hers. She could see the jagged tissue of his scar up close, the way it puckered and twisted. She didn't flinch. "Yes," she whispered fiercely. "Take me as your betrothed. A madman does not court a daughter of an ancient, if impoverished, earldom. A murderer does not engage in a highly public, perfectly proper romance. I will walk on your arm, I will smile at your side, and I will prove to London that the Duke of Westmoreland is merely eccentric, not dangerous." Alistair stared at her, the silence stretching between them, thick and electric. "You would tie yourself to a monster to save your father's neck." "My father is a fool, but he is blood," Genevieve replied, her eyes flashing. "Rutherford demands £20,000 or my hand in marriage. Pay my father's debt, secure my family's estate, and in return, I will be the perfect, adoring fiancé. Once the Crown backs down and your properties are secure, we can quietly break the engagement due to irreconcilable differences." Alistair slowly circled her like a predator, assessing a particularly bold prey. "It is a dangerous game you propose, Lady Genevieve. The Tun is vicious. They will tear you apart for associating with me." "They have already torn me apart for my father's poverty," she shot back. "I prefer the gossip of scandal to the reality of Rutherford's bed." "Oh, I think." He stopped in front of her, his expression unreadable. Then he reached out, his large, gloved hand brushing against her cheek. Genevieve forced herself to remain perfectly still. "You do not fear me," he noted, a strange mixture of suspicion and awe in his voice. "I fear poverty. I fear Thomas Rutherford," Genevieve said. "A scar is just a scar, Your Grace. It tells me you survived. It does not tell me you are a monster. Something fractured in Alistair's gaze, a momentary breach in the fortress of his anger. He pulled his hand back as if he had been burned. "Very well," Alistair said, his voice dropping an octave. "I will pay Rutherford the 20,000. But know this, Genevieve, if you betray me, if this is some elaborate trap orchestrated by my enemies to humiliate me further, I will not be as gentle as the rumors suggest. And if you break your word, Your Grace," she countered, extending her hand, "I will ensure the rumors of your madness become a verified fact." Alistair looked at her delicate outstretched hand, then wrapped his massive fingers around it. The grip was warm, firm, and binding. "Tomorrow I shall call upon you in the middle of Hyde Park. We shall give the vultures a show they will never forget." As Genevieve left the card room, she felt the crushing weight of her father's debt lift, only to be replaced by a new, terrifying reality. She had just tied her fate to the most dangerous man in England. What Genevieve did not know, however, was that Thomas Rutherford had eyes everywhere. Standing in the darkened alcove just outside the card room was Lord Harrington, a desperate aristocrat who fed information to Rutherford to keep his own debts at bay. Harrington had heard every word. The contract was forged, but the ink was already laced with poison. The following afternoon, the promenade at Hyde Park transformed into a theatre of the absurd. The crisp spring air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and the frantic whispers of the ton. Genevieve sat perfectly upright in Alistair's open-topped phaeton, dressed in a newly tailored pelisse of deep emerald silk, a gift delivered that morning from Covington House, paid for in advance. Beside her sat the Duke of Westmoreland. In the harsh light of day, the jagged silver scar bisecting his face was impossible to ignore. But Genevieve did not flinch. She kept a light, comforting hand resting on his velvet-clad forearm. "They look at us as if we are riding a carriage straight to the guillotine," Alistair muttered, his jaw rigid. His good eye swept over the gawking aristocrats, who hastily pretended to adjust their parasols as the phaeton rolled past. "Let them look, Your Grace," Genevieve replied smoothly, offering a radiant smile to a deeply scandalized dowager. "A monster hides in the dark. A gentleman rides in the park. Keep your shoulders relaxed. You are a duke of the realm, not a prisoner on trial." The true turning point of the afternoon occurred near the Serpentine. A grand black carriage bearing the crest of the nation's greatest war hero came to a halt. Out stepped Arthur Wellesley, the first Duke of Wellington. The park collectively held its breath. Wellington was a notoriously difficult man to please, the ultimate arbiter of respectability in post-war London. Wellington strode directly toward their carriage, bypassing three prominent earls to reach them. "Covington," the field marshal barked, his stern face breaking into a rare, genuine smile. "It is about damn time you crawled out of that mausoleum of yours. I have missed my best cavalry tactician." Alistair's stiff posture faltered, a flicker of profound relief crossing his scarred features. "Your Grace, it has been a long time." "Ow! Too long," Wellington agreed before turning his sharp gaze to Genevieve. "And this must be the reason for your resurrection. Lady Genevieve, you have accomplished what the entire British Army could not, bringing this stubborn fool back into the light." By the time Wellington tipped his hat and departed, the social tide had shifted violently. If the Duke of Wellington endorsed Alistair Covington, the ton had no choice but to follow suit. Overnight, the madman of Mayfair became the tragic, romantic war hero. Invitations flooded the mailroom of Covington House. But as Alistair's star rose, a dark fury boiled in the slums of the city's financial district. Thomas Rutherford, the industrialist who held Lord Fairfax's crushing debts, smashed a crystal goblet against the stone hearth of his office. Lord Harrington cowered in the armchair, having just delivered the news of the Hyde Park triumph. "He paid the £20,000, Rutherford sneered, staring at the bank draft from the Bank of England sitting on his desk. "Covington thinks he can buy the girl and shut me out of high society. He is sorely mistaken. I do not just want the money, Harrington. I want the Fairfax name. I want to crush the aristocrats who look down their aristocratic noses at me." Rutherford moved to his iron safe and extracted a brittle, yellowed piece of parchment. "It is time to remind the Duke of Westmoreland why he hid in the dark to begin with." Ugh. 3 nights later, Genevieve attended a private exhibition at Somerset House, admiring the portraits of Sir Thomas Lawrence. Alistair had stepped away to procure them champagne. Lady Genevieve, a voice slithered over her shoulder. She turned to find Thomas Rutherford. It was a broad, bullish man, his expensive clothes failing to mask the cruel, unrefined edges of his nature. "Mr. Rutherford," Genevieve said, her voice dropping to a glacial chill, "the Duke of Westmoreland settled my father's accounts in full. We have nothing to discuss." "On the contrary, my dear," Rutherford smiled, revealing a row of yellowed teeth. He stepped dangerously close, forcing her back into the alcove. "Your father's debts are paid, yes, but I hold another debt, one of a more historical nature. He pulled the yellowed letter from his coat and forced it into her hands. Genevieve recognized the feminine, frantic handwriting immediately. It was signed by Lady Rosalind Alistair's dead fiancé. As Genevieve read the desperate words, her blood ran cold. Rosalind had not been murdered in a fit of madness. The letter proved that before her engagement to Alistair, Rosalind had accrued massive secret gambling debts bought by Rutherford. Rutherford leaned in, his voice a venomous hiss. "Here are my terms, Lady Genevieve. First, you will sever your engagement to the Duke by tomorrow morning. Second, you will state publicly that he threatened your life, cementing his ruin. Third, you will marry me by special license this weekend. And if I refuse," she whispered. "Then I take this letter to the magistrate," Rutherford replied. "It details how I ordered Rosalind to steal Covington's military intelligence to pay her debts. When she failed, my men visited her. She threw herself down those stairs to escape my debt collectors. But Covington, he covered it up to protect her family's precious honor. If I release this, the scandal will destroy the Covington name entirely. He will be stripped of everything for harboring a traitor." Genevieve looked at the brutal industrialist, her mind racing. He expected her to weep. He expected her to break. Instead, Genevieve carefully folded the letter, slipped it into her reticule, and met his eyes with absolute defiance. "You underestimate me, Mr. Rutherford, and you severely underestimate the Duke of Westmoreland." Genevieve did not flee into the night, nor did she pen a tragic, tear-stained farewell letter to leave upon a silver tray. The moment Rutherford's broad, arrogant back disappeared into the milling crowd of aristocrats, she turned on her heel. She found Alistair standing rigidly by the champagne fountains, his one good eye scanning the room with the hyper-vigilance of a soldier expecting an ambush. She did not speak. She simply gripped his velvet-clad forearm with a strength that belied her delicate frame and marched him straight out of Somerset House. Inside the enclosed carriage, rattling violently over the slick cobblestone streets of the Strand, she told him everything. She did not stutter, nor did she attempt to soften the brutal edges of the truth. She laid out Rutherford's blackmail, the damning contents of Rosalind's letter, and the impossible ultimatum she had been given. She detailed how Rutherford's men had hounded his former fiancée, driving the terrified girl to the edge of the grand staircase. Alistair sat in stunned, suffocating silence. The flickering amber light of the passing street lamps danced across his scarred face, illuminating the profound shock twisting his features. You are telling me this?" He finally rasped, his voice sounding as though it had been dragged over broken glass. "You possess the instrument of my absolute ruin in your reticule, and you are not running from me." "Why, in God's name, would I run?" Genevieve demanded, her chest heaving, her eyes flashing with a fierce, protective loyalty that pinned him to the velvet squabs. "You took the blame for a terrified girl's death to spare her aristocratic family, the unbearable shame of her treason. You endured a year of isolation, a year of being called a monster by the very people you bled to protect at Waterloo, all to guard a ghost's reputation. You were the most honorable, infuriatingly noble man I have ever met, Alistair Covington. I am not letting a gutter-snipe like Thomas Rutherford destroy you." Alistair swallowed hard, a profound, unfamiliar emotion tightening his throat like a vise. For the first time since that French cavalry saber had torn his face and his life apart, he did not feel broken. He did not feel like the Phantom of Mayfair. He felt entirely, beautifully seen. "Then we do not bend," Alistair said softly. The weary, haunted aristocrat vanished, and in his place sat the ruthless cavalry commander who had held the line at Hougoumont. "We break him, The counter-strike required a weapon far sharper than a dueling pistol. It required the absolute destruction of Rutherford's god, his money. Before dawn broke over London, Alistair's carriage stopped outside the heavily guarded estate of Nathan Mayer Rothschild. The most powerful financier in all of Europe was not a man who took unannounced meetings in the dead of night, but the Duke of Westmoreland was not a man who asked for permission. Seated in Rothschild's opulent, mahogany-panelled study, Alistair laid out his immense fortune, the vast, unentailed Covington coffers as collateral. "I do not want to merely defeat him, Lord Rothschild," Alistair stated, his grey eye cold and unyielding. "I want his empire dismantled brick by brick. I want his shipping lines bought, his textile mills seized, and every piece of paper bearing his name in my possession by tomorrow midnight." Rothschild adjusted his gold-rimmed spectacles, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "A hostile siege upon the financial district. How incredibly unorthodox, Your Grace." "It will be my absolute pleasure." The trap was sprung the following midnight. Rutherford had demanded a clandestine rendezvous at his private, sprawling warehouse along the River Thames to finalize Genevieve's surrender. The warehouse was cavernous, damp, and reeked of rotting timber, river brine, and smuggled gin. Rutherford stood triumphantly beside a solitary lantern, a heavy iron pocket watch ticking loudly in his palm. He expected a weeping, broken Genevieve to walk through the heavy oak doors. Instead, the doors burst inward with a violently controlled force, the iron hinges screaming in protest. From the swirling river fog stepped the towering silhouette of Alistair Covington. Rutherford staggered back, his triumphant sneer collapsing into pure panic. He drew a double-barreled flintlock pistol from his heavy woolen coat. "You are trespassing, Covington. Where is the girl? If she is not here, I swear I will march straight to the magistrate. She is safe," Alistair growled, stepping fully into the dim, amber light. His scarred face looked less like a monster and more like a god of vengeance, "which is significantly more than I can say for you." "I will ruin you," Rutherford shouted, his hand trembling as he leveled the pistol at the Duke's chest. "I have the letter. I will ruin the Fairfax family, and I will hang you for treason." "You have absolutely nothing, Mr. Rutherford." A new, impeccably calm voice echoed from the shadowed rafters. From behind a stack of wooden crates stepped Nathan Mayer Rothschild, accompanied by a dozen heavily armed, grim-faced Bow Street runners. Rutherford's face drained of all color, the pistol drooping in his grip. "Lord Rothschild, what is the meaning of this?" "The meaning, Rutherford, is that your entire financial empire is built on mud, and the tide has just rushed in," Rothschild said smoothly, pulling a thick stack of promissory notes from his coat. "His Grace and I have spent the last 48 hours quietly executing a massacre on the exchange. We purchased every single one of your outstanding debts, your shipping contracts, and your over-leveraged investments. As of an hour ago, I called them all in. You are completely bankrupt, sir. You do not even own the coat on your back." Alistair stepped forward, closing the distance until the barrel of Rutherford's pistol was inches from his heart. He didn't blink. "Furthermore, my men intercepted Lord Harrington at the docks. The cowardly rat was quite eager to confess to his part in your extortion rings, in exchange for a lighter sentence and a ticket to America. The runners are here to arrest you for blackmail, extortion, and the indirect manslaughter of Lady Rosalind." Rutherford let out a pathetic, suffocated cry, dropping the heavy pistol to the floorboards. The Bow Street runners surged forward, slamming the ruined industrialist against a brick pillar and binding his wrists in heavy iron shackles. Alistair did not stay to watch the man beg. He turned his back on the ashes of Thomas Rutherford's life and walked out into the cool, cleansing London night. Genevieve was waiting for him in the carriage, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. As Alistair climbed inside and signaled the driver, the adrenaline of the confrontation rapidly faded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. He leaned his head against the velvet interior, closing his eye. "It is done," Alistair said softly, the silence of the carriage wrapping around them. "The letter is secured and burned. Rutherford will rot in Newgate Prison, and your father's debts are permanently erased. You are safe, Genevieve. You are free." Genevieve looked at him, her heart aching with a sudden, sharp realization. The danger was over. The dragon had been slain. According to the cold, calculating parameters of their contract, They were now supposed to stage a polite public falling out and go their separate lonely ways. "And what of our arrangement, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper above the clattering wheels. "Do we cite irreconcilable differences tomorrow morning in the society papers?" Alistair looked down at his large, gloved hands. He was a duke once more, powerful and feared, but in his heart he still believed he was the scarred phantom. "You have your freedom, Genevieve. You saved my life, and I saved yours. I will not hold a vibrant, beautiful woman to a madman's bargain." "But what if I do not want my freedom?" Alistair's head snapped up. His storm-glass eye met hers wide, unguarded, and desperately vulnerable. Genevieve did not hesitate. She closed the distance between them, ignoring the boundaries of propriety. She reached up, her warm, ungloved fingers gently, reverently tracing the jagged silver line of the scar that marred his cheek. Alistair's breath hitched violently in his chest, his entire body going rigid. But he did not pull away. He leaned into her touch, closing his eye, as if her fingertips were a soothing balm to a wound that had bled for over a year. "You are no madman, Alistair," she murmured, her face inches from his, her breath ghosting across his lips. "You are the bravest man I know, and I am not leaving." When he kissed her, it was not the desperate, frantic kiss of a condemned man, but the deep, passionate promise of a man who had finally found his way back to the light. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his heart, anchoring himself to the one soul brave enough to brave his darkness. Society had feared the Duke's scarred heart, but Genevieve had possessed the unyielding courage to hold it, and in return it beat only for her. Did Genevieve's courage and the Duke's redemption leave you breathless? True love sees beyond the scars, and justice always finds a way in the shadows of Mayfair. If you love this historical journey of danger, deception, and undeniable romance, hit that like button right now. Share this story with your friends who love a brilliant twist, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, heart-pounding romantic sagas.